This is Visions Under Construction, a chance for our guests to share their visions and tell us what they're working on. For their continued support, we would like to thank Simwood, straight-talking, forward-thinking telecoms. Simwood.com. Why not make Cloudonics your communication partner? Go to cloudonics.io. You can find everything about the VUC at vuc.me, thanks to Bluehost, and thanks also to zipdx.com, the conference bridge, and to voxphone.com for local rate dial-ins. Okay, welcome to the zombie edition of whatever we call ourselves this week. I just got back from a long trip. I left for that trip about 24 hours ago. And somebody's called. This is great because I want to talk about this phone. But I'll mention right away that this is one of those spoofed phone numbers that's supposed to look like yours coming from one of your neighbors. And why don't we just swipe down to tell them that we don't want us. Interesting thing, since I'm on this, here's the report on the, so this is Google Fi. Trying to get it so you can see the focus. It's pretty hard to do, but it's HSPA. And it's one of the lowest signals ever. This is a terrible room that I'm in. The signal is no good, but there is Wi-Fi. However, the Wi-Fi with Google Fi doesn't work unless your carrier is. In other words, on this phone, I use Google Fi and I use Google Voice, and I would like to make Google Voice calls, and I can't because you can't do both on one phone. And I wanted to show you the phone and talk a little bit about that experience before we get off into all kinds of other irrelevant things that we're going to talk about today. But if you think I'm dingy now, wait a few minutes because I'll run out of steam probably in 5 minutes. That's the G6. It's one of the latest things to be added to the Google Fi experience. I wanted to purchase a reasonably inexpensive phone that had the US bands. So while I was in the United States, now this is hard information, folks. While I was in the United States, the thing worked really, really well. This is a nice phone for $240. Actually, list price I think is $250. But if you activate it on anybody, it's like $239 or $229 or something like that. Here it is. Pre-qualify now for as low as $11 a month. Don't do that. That is a scam, in my opinion, or $249.99. But in fact, if you go to Best Buy or somebody, or what is it, Verizon, one of those U.S. companies, when you go with them, I think you'll get it around $229 or less, maybe even $200, might even be $225, including tax, depending on your state. Anyway, that's that. Let's move over to kill that and look at this. So a little bit about this phone. It's quite nice. Now, it's almost impossible to actually see anything, especially if I want to get rid of all these notifications that are from relatives and so on. Here's the phone with the icons. And that little circle represents the time and also the battery level. So it's kind of a nice looking, get it close, you won't get the, you won't actually be able to see, it gets out of focus. Anyway, worked beautifully. It worked great there. And it does texting over the Google Fi number just fine. But if you're going to make a call, the calls will be Wi-Fi, and they will be related to your carrier. Well, your carrier's Google Fi. Anyway, no Google Voice with it. Now, while I was there, I also had another phone that doesn't have all of the US bands. So that phone, my OnePlus 3T, that phone mostly was H+, or sometimes 3G, whereas the Google Fi phone was a lot more times LTE, almost all the time LTE. It was on AT&T and it was on T-Mobile. I don't know what the third carrier is. Would that be Verizon? But for whatever it is, no, Sprint, as a matter of fact. I never saw Sprint on my, I was in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. I didn't see Sprint. But main thing to say about Google Fi is that I don't think it's that great a deal, at least certainly not compared to the deal I have here. My normal phone here, 10 euros a month, which is about $12.50, $13 a month, comes with 13 gigs of data. Okay, well, that's already 30 gigs of data. 30 gigs of data on Google, each gig is $10. So that's a little odd, isn't it? But the maximum you'll ever pay is $60. So wait, 6 gigs is $60? I'm paying less than 1/3 of that for 30 gigs. Anyway, you do the math. I can't right now. Doesn't seem to be that great, though. And it calls on Wi-Fi when it can. Well, that's wonderful if you got good Wi-Fi most of the time. It also calls on open Wi-Fi. Will that be a problem someday? I don't know. Don't know if Jay or Michael want to weigh in on. And Michael doesn't like Google Voice because it's a free service and therefore undependable. And it's true, it could go away any second. So I agree with you there, Michael. But it's been very handy for me to be able to call my brother and so on. This said, you can use Hangouts from Europe to do the same thing. Jay, any comments on either Voice or Fi?
Well, I have a, let's see, do I need to mute something? Am I echoing?
Oh, you're good.
You're echo.
You're fine.
Okay. So I have a friend that uses Google Fi and seems like he has a lot of problems with it. So I don't know. Other than that, that's my comment on it. There are some things about it that I really like, the ability to, trade carriers on the fly or whatever. That's pretty slick, but it seems like I'm not sure that it works as well as it could. So I think the overall concept is great. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the direction things are going, is to have sort of this ubiquitous connectivity, be it Wi-Fi, mesh, 5G, LTE, whatever. But, the direction is, in my view, that's a solid direction for sure.
Yeah, and what I was interested in, the whole point of me doing this really was also just to see how that would actually work out in the wild, as it were. And it works fine. I mean, I actually did not make many calls. I was doing a lot of texting, but we were walking outside a lot of the time. Boy, was it hot there, by the way. It was just as hot as it's been here, which is really hot, high 80s. And so we were walking around in the hot sun. I wasn't going to be making a lot of phone calls. That was outside, had a very good signal most of the time, as I said, mostly LTE, mostly very good signal. In the house, the Wi-Fi we had wasn't great. I don't know whose Wi-Fi it was, but it was in an Airbnb. It was okay most of the time, but it was weak some of the time. And I wonder about how good a phone call would be in that case if it insists on using Wi-Fi. We don't know really the logic behind it, but I agree with you 100%. The point of it, the idea is good, that it could just talk to anything. The realization is a whole other story. And they claim, I mean, it still doesn't answer the age-old question of an American in Paris, besides all the dancing and singing of Gene Kelly, would be, you would never get anybody to call you back if you've got your American number. Although these days, actually, most people can call the United States, but they wouldn't understand. The average person wouldn't know the area code. They wouldn't get it, so they would probably not answer the phone at all. So you always want a local number wherever you are, really, if you're going to call restaurants and stuff, whatever. And yet, it's too bad James isn't here, because I think they have, well, TruePhone had that kind of thing, and they have a few competitors who do it. I don't know. Michael, anything in all of this?
I haven't used Google Fi. I think my phone is capable of it, but I've been with T-Mobile for so long. I would switch for the cost savings. However, I'm a little annoyed. The Pixel has this capability that when you turn on the Wi-Fi calling, the setting is specifically prefer Wi-Fi calling and not use it when you can. And the problem is, when you're roaming between towers and stuff, and you have the problem is transitions, right? Transitions sometimes, if you're way off in the country, between cells is bad enough, but transitions between LTE and Wi-Fi or HSPA and Wi-Fi have proven to be terrible, and calls get dropped. When I was at ClueCon, though, there was no LTE coverage in the main room from T-Mobile. Consequently, I turned on the Wi-Fi calling and it worked okay, but not wonderful. So I don't know.
I have a question for both of you when we're done with this particular segment of the topic.
Oh, a question that's not on Phi and all of that. I'm trying to think if there's any interesting conclusion to this. I would recommend people who are looking for an economical phone. I've only had it for like 11 days, so who knows if it blows up tomorrow. I didn't recommend it to you, but it is a very nice phone. I like a large phone, and I think it's a 5 or 5.5 inch. It's very similar to my current main phone. It has a really nice looking screen, and I think it's USB-C, but it does have a headphone jack. What is it with these losing the headphone jack? No one likes that idea. There's no plus. There is no good thing for the consumer on that. Obviously, there's a little bit of cost savings, I guess.
No, well, there's a little bit of cost savings. Mechanically, it's a very large connector. They want to be rid of it. In terms of what do they call it? I can't remember exactly, but environmental proofing, waterproofing, dust proofing. That's the major advantage that you can drop if your phone doesn't have a traditional headphone jack. You can drop your phone in the toilet, and the interior is effectively sealed
because USB-C is closed somehow.
Yeah, the design of the connector.
That's a big hole, much bigger than
the design of the connector facilitates that, whereas the headphone jack is different. I do agree with you, though. I still prefer wired headphones to any kind of Bluetooth thing. And
Bluetooth is great. What you want is belt and suspenders. You want Bluetooth and the thing, because, for example, I have a terrific headset that does Bluetooth, but sometimes I just don't feel like wearing it. And I want to have a little, like an earbud thing. And today I noticed I was able to watch the horrible movies that were available on the plane. I watched one whole movie with the earbuds on. I don't have any cordless or wireless Bluetooth earbuds. I do have a couple of Bluetooth headsets, one of which is a kind of a sport thing. One of them you had, Michael, which was the little white. I already forgot the name of it, but the ones that claimed they had better bass, but they wouldn't stay in my ears and lasted about an hour as far as battery. You remember that? I can dig it out, maybe.
Don't remember, actually. I've had so many. Tried so many different headsets that I ultimately did not like. Most recently, my wife got me one from the Fitbit range, and because they were a gift, I used them occasionally. But oh yeah, those are the Plantronics. Those I don't know.
Which is a very
I know about those. My Fitbit ones are similar to that. They're a cordless headset that manages to still have a cord, which I think is regrettable.
Well, yeah, and Plantronics. Wow, Plantronics makes good stuff generally. This is not good at all. The battery life really isn't better than 2. I think it's like an hour. It might be 2. On the other hand, this thing, which is another Plantronics, I think.
Yeah, and those are sort of the sport model.
But this is terrific. It gets probably at least 5 hours, maybe 6, maybe more. And it works well and it stays in the ear. I don't mind the fact that it's got a thing in back. But what's nice about this too is you can wear a cap or a hat with it, or a helmet for a bike. And of course, finally, we have stuff like this, which isn't Bluetooth at all. I keep forgetting. It's clear, KLER or something. The technology. It's not DECT. It's not Bluetooth. Probably enough on that. Jay, you were about to change the subject. Let's hear it. Go for it.
So my question for both of you is about what percentage of the phone calls that you receive or engage in are set up in advance? So in other words, do people text you and schedule a call or say, I'm going to call you? Because it seems like the days of just impromptu phone call are kind of diminishing for me. It's like, yeah, I think that's an interesting phenomenon.
I agree.
Actually, it's been that way for a while because amongst younger people, and none of us are younger people, I should point out, it's in bad form to just call. You should text first. And I know that happens a lot. Because we have more channels now, there's a tendency to do something that's less invasive and then escalate it. The only people who call me unannounced are either tech support calls, as the one that just came in as we were starting this, or my wife. But other than
it's interesting because we're so predominantly asynchronous communications and written communications, and I think there's a whole lot that's lost when we don't do the voice communications, and it's kind of a lot of extra friction to set up a call with the texting back and forth and time and all that sort of thing. It's just, it's really an interesting balance of, what's polite, what's acceptable, what's the norm, and what works. And what do you get the most from?
Well, there's another element here, Jay, that you're forgetting, which is, for example, 2 days ago, I was, there was a whole day of texting back and forth, like once every 30 minutes about plans, restaurants, blah, blah, blah. What are we doing this tonight and all that? And at some point, I asked a question and he said, can you call me? Well, I saw that on my watch while I was driving. So no. Well, you can, now I should correct myself. Of course, you can. I didn't have the car connected to the rental car's Bluetooth. I could have done that easily enough. That's actually fairly simple to do these days. But on the other hand, the audio is rarely good on that particular kind of connection anyway. And to answer your question, I really hate getting a call if I'm not ready for it. And the only calls I make are to companies, people who are going to answer the phone and expect a call. If I want to call someone, including in my family, well, other than my wife, I don't, that's like Michael, or you, I forgot who said, I think it was Michael. And it's true. If I need to call my wife or if she needs to call me, can I call you? Knowing that if somebody's driving, they just won't answer. Whereas when the person asked me that, nothing happened for about 15 minutes because I didn't want to text. You can also delete, as you all know, you can dictate text in the car too, behind the wheel. But none of that is 100% satisfactory. Maybe that's where the answer partly to this conversation is that if everything was frictionless, all this, call Michael Graves, you're never 100% sure that's going to get the right. So it's like, call Michael Graves, call Sylvia Names. I don't know. It doesn't get it. By the way, you'll be pleased to know, everybody who's listening to this, that I was in an Airbnb and one of the amenities was an Amazon Alexa, which the first thing I did was unplug it, and it stayed unplugged the whole time I was there.
So that was my next question on what's called ambient computing with the Google Home and Amazon Alexa. Are either of you doing any phone calls through those devices? And what's that experience like?
Only occasionally. My wife has a habit, as we have several Echoes littered about the place. My wife has a habit of asking the Echo that's on her desk to call me out in my office, and my office is in the garage apartment, so I'm physically separated. She uses it effectively as a voice-controlled speakerphone, but that's the only time. That and occasionally James Bodie. What is it? What is the equivalent of butt dialing when you're accidentally calling somebody over an Echo? Anyway, the experience has been okay, although I don't entirely understand it, and sometimes it's better than others. Once the call is set up, the experience is adequate. Sometimes getting the call set up can be frail.
I know that I would absolutely love to have an intercom. We've tried Zello and every other thing that goes on Wi-Fi over here because we're on 2 different floors. You know, in the old days, there were ways to just ring your own phone number and the person would pick up and you go, "Hey, it's me." That was a long, long time ago. There was a 4-digit number, I think it was, that you would dial on your AT&T landline. But there's no good way for us to do that. I mean, we can phone each other. So it would be one argument for having the Google Home or whatever, because that thing can actually make announcements between devices.
Well, I think, and if you had, something like the Gigasets where you can call between extensions,
That's right.
Still quite sensible. It's still a reason to have a home phone in some cases. One thing I would note, though, going back to Jay's earlier point about texting and modalities, there are so many modalities of communication now. Some people, he's looking at you, Dave Michaels, some people will Skype me. Not very many, though. Some people will talk to me, like Emil Ivoff always reaches out over Google Chat. Some people are on Wire. There are so many different modes of communication now that it almost takes a simple text message to set up how we're going to have our call, because you might be engaged in this or that, or because of what's physically at your disposal at the very moment. It might be more convenient for you to, do a hangout or whatnot. So
yeah, it becomes. I think people have an expectation that Jay's going to use certain modes of communication, and Jay's going to be checking those modes on a frequent basis, and it almost becomes like kind of part of my persona in different, my business persona, my family persona, whatever. What mode of communication am I going to use? And there are so many, and it still continues to proliferate. It can, result in annoyances at best, and pure miscommunications at worst. So it's an interesting phenomenon, interesting time that we're in, where it's almost like getting DDoSed on our communication channels, where we've got so many of them that it almost becomes unusable.
It's a little bit like TCP, isn't it? Right? Because we're negotiating, we're using some simplistic mechanism to negotiate how we're going to connect, and we're even doing that across different modes. It's virtual SDP.
One of my solutions to all of that is I use email, because I live in email, and you can only live in email if you're down to inbox 0 almost all the time. And I've arranged that. I really don't get a lot of email, or what I do get is filed automatically anyway. Whatever. The point is, you can have, for example, some people use direct messages on Twitter, which is funny. I wouldn't trust that. I use it for some things. But there are people who you can only reach that way, or to make it more clear, you can only reach them that way if you're not on Messenger, right? So that's a whole other problem. But you can direct, for example, Google Voice, which to the average person you're calling looks like a text when you're sending them a message. That triggers an email. So I see that regardless whether I don't have to have Google Voice on. And anyway, I think the app can be off and still notify you. but you can funnel the notifications. I don't think Wire has a way to do that. Wire, though, is reserved for me. Wire is pretty much reserved for stuff that you really don't want to be in public ever. Theoretically, I guess Skype could do that. Maybe Twitter DM, kind of, except if they got hacked or your channel got hacked. But Wire and other things like it are good for that. So, for example, I had a long talk with relatives about, if you're going to send me your banking information, do it on Wire, or do it on, for me, it's Wire anyway. Hey, you want the money, use Wire. Because I trust it. I know them, and I trust that implicitly. Whereas you start sending SMSs of your bank number, what could go wrong, right?
So do either of you know if there's a service out there that has an effective dashboard that can sort of amalgamate all these different communication modes, and we can control and provision and so forth?
There is a thing. What was it called? Fritz, something like that. Let me look. But I mean, it's just an agglomeration of
well, doesn't that become sort of isn't that what did we used to call that, the federation kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly.
A cross between identity and federation, starts to sound like the Matrix. Hey, Matthew, we miss you.
Was it Fritz though? No, France.
There was a Fritz box.
Now I can't find any mention of them. Anyway, it had Facebook Messenger. It may have had Skype. It had a whole bunch of things,
And my wife uses Hootsuite, but that's more about like marketing.
Yeah,
or
that's
cross-channel communications.
No, this Fritz was a client, and I think it did all kinds of chats in one unit. As did was it ICU that did all that too? I think, or some IRC clients that do have like 5 different channels they can use. But I mean, that's your dashboard, Jay. But it's kind of cumbersome too, and you've got some.
Yeah, I was gonna say Matrix as well, and I'm slowly but surely starting to use Matrix, and I don't fully understand how to provision it and all that sort of thing. That's kind of the other friction point, is each one of these things has a different interface that takes a certain amount of investment of time and energy to figure out, how does this thing work? And that's at least for me, that's problematic.
Yeah, I tried to get on Matrix today, just an hour ago, and I was on it, but I couldn't figure out how to get around. And I know I wasn't in the right. In fact, I was in the VUC room, which hasn't been used since like May. But I was trying to get on the matrices, the main matrix. There used to be also a, James's former company had one. But I know Matthew and company, they have their main one, and I was trying to get on that, and I couldn't remember how to get on it. It's the matrix.
Yeah, I spent about 5 or 10 minutes scrolling around Matrix, just trying to find how to sign off.
I agree. I was trying to figure that out, all of that out too. Their homepage is an explanation, and it doesn't seem to have a sign in right on there, for example, or sign out. So I don't know. Anyway, just haven't invested enough time in it. Matrix is obviously a viable client, and it does a lot of interesting things, and we probably should get to know it better.
Well, is Riot the client and Matrix is the server?
Yeah, I guess you'd have to say that. I was talking about the area, the room, if you will, and I think there's a matrix.org room or area, public area. Mm-hmm. And then there's Slack, of course, and our Slack was never public, but you can have a public Slack too. But in the private Slack, I found it cumbersome. I think it's way overkill for what our group was trying to do. But it is a repository of knowledge. If you can remember how to get into it, anybody, I made a lot of notes about a lot of this stuff and how it works. because it's pretty off the wall stuff, all of it, all of the VUC.
Yeah, that's the other thing is I've started to use Slack and, you know, navigating through that, figuring out the nuances of that. And sometimes it's just a little annoyance. Like I hit the enter button on Slack and all of a sudden it sends the message instead of skipping a line.
I think that's an option on, it's an option on Facebook even, if I remember correctly, but it's probably an option on a lot of things. It does not work that way on Wire. It isn't an option as far as I know, but a lot of chat clients work that way.
But what I'm saying is each one has its little nuances that can be rather, at best, annoying, and at worst, you know, kind of damaging in certain instances.
And by the way,
so
it's not a Mac. Let me tell you that just the way Mac doesn't have a backspace button, it only has a delete button, and there's sort of all kinds of software behaviors that revolve around that. That just drives me nuts as I go between platforms.
Doesn't Jitsi, what's the Jitsi client now? Also, they've got what was the new thing that
there you go. Slackbot HipChat, right?
HipChat, yeah.
Yeah.
Or did that got merged into Slack? Is that it?
Well, that's being merged into Slack, I believe. And that's also kind of another problematic area that we talked about a couple of weeks ago is, you know, you build up this repository of information, just like you were saying on Slack, Randy, and then all of a sudden it gets bought or shuts down or whatever. All your stuff is gone. That's a problem.
Well, presumably there's a takeout option, or Google uses takeout. I mean, there's an export. Medium has an export, very clear. Twitter, I think, even has an export. Got it. Why would you want to?
A great idea for a startup. We would call it Uber Bytes. It's like takeout or to go. It delivers your bytes to you.
All of them. It goes out and finds everything you're involved in and crushes that all into a heavily compressed database.
Yeah, I just had an experience that was, you know, somewhere between annoying and damaging with, you know, you set up these Google Docs and Google platforms. I guess it's called G Suite now.
Yeah.
And I did that for a startup a few years ago. And I started getting these messages, hey, sign on or else your Google G Suite's going to be deleted and blah, blah, blah. So I kind of got down to the wire and I thought I signed on to save the account, and bingo, the next day I get, hey, all your stuff is gone. So that was rather annoying. I mean, hopefully that won't be problematic in the future, and I've done that. I've done the download all your stuff. The problem is it's not in the same format. You know, you don't have the full service and so forth. So yeah, you get the blob of data, but you know, so what? So anyway.
Yeah, just to correct my previous thing, it's Franz, F-R-A-N-Z, which does WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Slack, HipChat, Telegram, and many, many more. I think Skype may even.
How long has that been around, Randy?
Long time, at least a year or two, and it's up to version 5. Let's look at the about here. I'll put this on rather than my my mug. Application window. Is this it? Yeah. So what is France? France is your messaging app. It's also the former emperor of Austria. Chat and messaging service into one application. Supports Slack, WhatsApp, WeChat, HipChat, Facebook Messenger, Telegram, Google Hangouts, GroupMe, Skype, and again, many more. Where's the list? Where's the list? And it's free for Mac or Windows. Sorry, Linux users. Obviously, there doesn't seem to be any app for it. But I did try it, and especially when I wanted to use Facebook Messenger to talk to people who care about that, and I didn't want to use Facebook Messenger. but it works. It just pulls all that stuff together into a single app, but it's kind of a frontal for the apps. In other words, it's not really rocket science. I don't think. I don't mean to denigrate their work. I'm sure it's great, but it does. All it does is bring all these things into one window, basically.
Well, I would say there's a lot of value in that, you know, if it's done right. And
if you know people on all of
hopefully-
those things, it is, yeah. And since they include Telegram, I think they said, right? Not Signal.
Yeah, you did say Telegram.
Telegram. So, you know, Telegram, I don't know, other than people in the Ukraine, and there's a lot of areas where a lot of people use that and it matters. I'm not sure that's the big one. Isn't Signal? See, here it is starting. Signal is maybe bigger, or does anybody know? We should look at.
I think Telegram is, I don't know that much about Signal, but I think Telegram is the communication channel of choice, certainly for the blockchain and cryptocurrency communities, because it's theoretically encrypted end to end.
Mm-hmm.
And they raised a ton of money. I think it was $1 billion or a few billion via an ICO, if I'm not mistaken. It's hard to keep up with all the ICOs, but so I think Telegram certainly has a lot of momentum in the blockchain and cryptocurrency realm.
Doesn't work in Russia anymore, though.
Yeah,
they shut down the servers. Here's a question.
Relative to that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I'll be quick. There's a question on Quora. Which messaging app, Telegram, Signal, Wire, is more secure and user-friendly? And the answer, obviously, it's very much subjective. But the first answer is, in my opinion, the most secure messaging app would be WhatsApp, due to the fact that all messages are encrypted end-to-end. Well, a lot of them are in a lot of these platforms. But the fact that WhatsApp belongs to Facebook is a huge red flag as far as I'm concerned. However, and this is the end of what I'm going to say about this article, they mentioned Wire. They also mentioned Zangi, which I've never heard of. But this person says, I'm thinking you need the safe of the safest, which is probably Zangi Safe Messenger, because it has a couple of security codes like encryption, decentralized, and serverless. So no traces on the internet. Anybody heard of that? I have not. Zangi Safe Messenger. It's free. Create your own decentralized version. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll have to keep that.
I put it to you this way. Everybody claims they have encrypted end-to-end. And so ultimately, unless you're the kind of an engineer who can test that and run your own instance, and I don't know too many people like that, then you have to trust, right? And I trust the guys behind Wire more than the rest. But I had a question, since you were talking about crypto stuff, Jay. Do you have any sense of, I guess just recently, you know, NVIDIA's been in the news this past week with some new hardware launches. And one of the things that just came out a couple of days ago was they missed, or they're altering their revenue projections based on the inability to extract revenue from the crypto mining market in the manner that they thought was going to be happening. And I don't remember, I only glanced at the thing, but the numbers are being revised downward substantially, even just a week before they're going to launch the new GTX 2000 range. Any comment, any scuttlebutt, any news on that? Or I thought that
I don't really follow the mining. Go ahead.
I just thought NVIDIA was making hay with that mining circumstance.
It's my understanding that several of these hardware manufacturers are getting a lot of their boost from the mining sector, and this, there have been times when you can't find certain equipment; it's all sold out, and you know, there's big runs on it and all sorts of things. But I don't know, you know, the latest and the greatest NVIDIA. In general, there's certainly a large interest in getting off of proof of work for creating consensus. And I think as much time and effort and need as there is to get off of proof of work, I'm not aware of anybody that's really successfully done that. So, you know, there are initiatives to get off of proof of work so that we don't have this crazy computational war, and we're not using this enormous amount of energy in order to create decentralized or distributed consensus. But as far as I know, and I think this was highlighted in some recent talks by Andreas Antonopoulos, what works is proof of work. So as long as we have that around, there's going to be a need for certain specialized hardware like some of these companies make, like NVIDIA and so forth. And, you know, another key part of it, Michael, is that the price of the underlying cryptocurrencies has a big factor in the demand for the hardware. Because if, you know, Bitcoin is at $20,000 a Bitcoin, your mining operation has a significantly different economic characteristic to it than when, you know, Bitcoin is flirting around $6,000 a Bitcoin. So there's a whole bunch of different factors that influence all of this. And, you know, I could go on and on about it, but does that kind of answer your question?
I suppose as much as it can be answered. I'm interested in the relationship between the hardware vendors and the crypto miners, and because there are those who are using sort of GPUs just in general. Then there are those who are trying to use ASICs, and those who are using FPGAs, and they're driving different kinds of technology. Right, those are fundamentally different threads of technology. It's very interesting, and honestly, things have been pretty staid in that market for a while. You know, we've had reasonably capable GPUs, but there haven't been any great leaps in technology, and that just started last week when NVIDIA released their Turing series, which have hardware accelerated ray tracing built in, and the entertainment world is going to love that stuff. So we shall see how that plays out. But because there's the $10,000 GPUs, you can buy them now that do the kinds of things that, you know, were only sort of mathematical concepts in the early days of computer animation. Fun. I had another question for you all. These things are splayed out before me here.
One thing I would like to mention while you're thinking of your question, Michael, is, you know, I talked a little bit about the Decentralized Web Summit in San Francisco, and that was certainly an awesome event. And I think it's going on now, but there's another big, well, it's not big, it's actually quite small, but the people participating, I would say, are at the leading and cutting edge of the field. There's a cryptography conference that is going on or was going on in Santa Barbara. And those are the folks that are looking to create something that could be a replacement for proof of work. And, you know, we're talking about people like Silvio Macaulay of MIT, who's both a Turing Award winner as well as a Gödel Award winner. And, you know, they're doing some things that are very interesting. And if, in fact, they could come up with a new consensus mechanism, then the demand for this hardware that you're talking about, Michael, would dramatically decrease, in my view, if that makes sense. Hello, James and Andy.
Hi.
Hello. Apologies for being very late.
Yeah. Well, we had a bit of a busy day today.
You're looking dapper today, James.
Well,
He
I've
does.
come back. I've just been in with the government minister.
No
one
tie?
would. Well, not when I'm driving. No, I do take my tie off.
Good for
Would
you.
you prefer it if I put my tie on just to be with you?
That would have been something, I think. So while we're talking about this, this is kind of getting further and further off the topic that we didn't have anyway. But I'm just curious about and I don't know if any of you know anything about this, but I'll put it out there anyway. Once I tried to donate, because like everybody else, I've got $10 worth of Bitcoin in a wallet that I often forget the significant chain of letters and words for, but usually you can get it back with the two-factor or whatever. Anyway, so I wanted to donate, say, $15 to an organization that had a Bitcoin wallet address. And the $15 donation was accompanied by a $10 or $15 network fee. And I'm just wondering, because to me, that just kills it. I'll never use it for anything like that.
It does, which is why you need to be using something like Bitcoin Cash, which is so much cheaper, better suited.
I think your audio is very low, James. I heard what you said, but I had to turn it way up, I think. Can somebody?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a
there you
headset in here. I'll find a headset, don't worry.
Yeah, and then we'll have to hear that answer. Jay, you have a comment on that? Have you experienced it?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin, the killer application for blockchain has been the cryptocurrencies, but it's not what it was designed to do, which was, pay for your cup of coffee.
Yeah.
The killer application has been a store of value,
Mm-hmm.
and, sort of like a really, really liquid savings account, and in addition, kind of a hybrid of a savings account and a stock portfolio, all sort of balled into one. So yeah, the fees on, Bitcoin have gotten to a point where I don't think it's a transactional platform anymore for, as it was designed to do. There are some other things, like James is pointing out, and I'm not familiar with Bitcoin Cash. I mean, there's 1,700 different cryptocurrencies, or maybe more now, so it's almost impossible to keep up with the nuances of each one. But there are some things that are not really decentralized or distributed. They rely upon sort of central consensus mechanisms, and those can transact much faster and much cheaper. And
indeed, yeah.
From an end user standpoint,
yeah, which means that you can transact very much smaller quantities and at much greater speed.
right.
But if it's stuck in one of the older, if it's stuck in the older platform, I can't remember what I used, but wherever my wallet is, I can't get it to the more fluid area.
Well, this is why you don't want to be playing with Bitcoin, because it's just dinosauric, really, as a cryptocurrency. The only good thing about it is that it's got huge market cap, and therefore, the two things that you need with a cryptocurrency are market cap and functionality. And Bitcoin's got the former, but definitely does not have the latter.
Well, Bitcoin is also arguably the most decentralized construct out there. You don't have, a dominant personality or a dominant group that calls the shots on Bitcoin, whereas even Ethereum, has a lot of influence from a pretty small group of people. Now, arguably with Bitcoin, you could say you've only got a limited number of miners that are controlling the shots, and that is true to some degree, but Bitcoin is still a very, in many respects, getting as pure as possible to the idea of a decentralized construct. So anyway.
Someone suggested that we do a blockcast on the pod chain.
What?
The pod chain.
A blockcast on the pod chain.
You wouldn't have to be jet lagged, would you?
Yes,
by any
very
chance?
much. I didn't. That's not my idea. That's somebody's joke. I think it was the grumpy old geeks who said, one of them said that.
Is that coming on IRC? Because I can't get it on IRC.
It's a very funny. I'm not on IRC because nobody can get on. Nobody's able to get on IRC.
Really?
You know, well, you have to get in. You have to go into an invite. It's a long story. I'll look into it later. Not to later today, but later in the week. I'm not sure. We need to find out if that storm has settled down or not. It's really funny. We went for like 8 years that channels existed, and there's never been anything like that. And then somebody told me, you know, hey, your channel's full of spam. And I went and looked, and indeed it was. But then I found out that that was not just Freenode, but even all of the IRC was suffering from a very big storm of that stuff. And I couldn't even figure out what it was about. But maybe it's settled down now. I don't know. I'll have to see, because naturally I fumbled around until I found a way to pretty much shut this channel down entirely.
Yeah, we noticed. We
not
noticed
before
the posting of certain information. Yeah.
Well, not before I posted in the clear my password trying to get in. Because IRC, one of the things you can do so easily is if the slash doesn't go before the message to the chanserve, then everything's in the clear. So a small typo can turn into you putting your password in the clear, which is exactly what happened.
Sorry, are you suggesting that technology should allow for operator error?
For senior issues, maybe even.
Yeah. One of the interesting questions that was asked at ClueCon was anybody who's lost crypto keys for cryptocurrency, put your hand up. About half the room put their hand up.
Everybody, sure.
So I just wonder what the value of a cryptocurrency for which keys have been lost is. And what happens to the wealth? I mean, when you lose your crypto key, I mean, it's just like burning money, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's exactly like burning a stack of $100 bills on a table.
Unless somebody else can figure out how to get into your account, because that's apparently happened multiple times.
Yeah.
And a lot of times with significant amounts.
Well, quantum computing, there will become a point at which you can actually recover keys, apparently. So Richard Brady, lovely chap, South African, did a reasonably, very good talk at ClueCon about use of cryptocurrencies in the telco space. Some of his use cases were a bit old-fashioned, using cryptocurrency to pay for phone calls. It's not the sort of thing that you'd be doing in the future, because phone calls are just going to be free anyway. But you can take the constructs that he was using to pay for other things. And he had a live demo using a couple of different cryptocurrencies. And he was demonstrating how you can do sort of 1 or 2 cent type transactions at fast enough speeds to be able to place a phone call and not worry about the delay. So if you're paying it for Bitcoin, you'd have to kind of place your call and wait for sort of like 15 minutes whilst the transaction went through. Oh, and the other part of this is the ability to give change back. So when you start a transaction, you might want to lodge, 50 cents up front, but then at the end of your call or whatever the transaction is, you want to be able to receive change back again for the unused portion of credit that you didn't use.
And so, network fees would be applied in both directions.
Starting to merge. Yeah, all this stuff is starting to merge together, and something that I've given a lot of thought to is, could the biggest competitor of AT&T be Chase Bank? And could Chase Bank, biggest competitor, be AT&T?
Well, you know what? I think the answer is that both of them are going to be marginalized, because as soon as you've got the ability to decentralize the settlement, then what role does the bank have? What role does the centralized billing system within AT&T have if you can do rating and billing, say, on your SIM card?
Well, take that even further, right? Because you've already got Google with the Google Pay and Apple with Apple Pay, and basically they're effectively going kind of out of band, right? They're becoming financial institutions.
That's true, but it's still a centralized payment mechanism. So Google is still controlling that payment mechanism. And what they get out of it is they're kind of milking the information stream that goes with the payments.
Well, that circles back to some other comments. Is certainly Facebook, Google, Twitter have a huge leg up, in my opinion, over the telecoms and maybe even the banks on identity and communications. And
yeah, you're absolutely right. A very, very big part of this blockchain technology is this ability to prove that you are who you are. And at the same time, there's no reason why you can't have multiple identities, is there? So you could have one identity.
Which we all do.
Well, I think we do, yes.
Yeah, we all have different personas.
Different identities for different purposes.
And I think the real killer application in identity and decentralized constructs is to have a wider spectrum of absolute definitive identity to absolute anonymity, sort of like burner phones.
Burner IDs.
Yeah, burner IDs. I think you need actually both for everything to work. So it's anyway, that's an area I'm very much interested in, and I think obviously a lot of other people are as well.
The future world, financial world, is complicated, isn't it? It's going to be fun.
Well, there's a lot of things that are melting together with this decentralization, and it's much like the mid-90s, where a telephone call was very distinct from a radio broadcast, which was very distinct from a television program. And then this thing called the internet came along, and all those lines started to get blurred. And with this decentralization initiative, like you're saying, James, now all of a sudden it's not only are different technological silos starting to melt together, but now business models are melting together and policies melting together. So it's hard to tease out, who has the jurisdiction over what and what policies apply. So anyway, there's a melting together of money, of data, of communications, of identity, of jurisdiction, law. All this stuff is just sort of melting into the same pot. So that's my 2 cents.
Yes, an interesting world we're living in. Anyway, Randy, you look slightly stunned.
Yeah, I'm.
Your speech is slurred.
Well, I was trying to, at the same time.
Mind you do look quite healthy in terms of color, though, I suppose.
Yeah. What's your handle on? You have a handle on IRC, don't you? Is it James Bodie?
Yeah, but on IRC, I actually access that via Riot because
it doesn't matter for my experiment. I'm going to
hang on. I'll just.
Oh, no, you're not registered. Andy, your handle is registered.
Well, I will be in about 10 seconds. I'm just starting at Riot.
Not logged in.
Yes, my handle is registered.
And it's what is it? Remind me.
It's mine. Jazzy Jack.
Jazz. How do you spell it?
JASNEJAC.
Wait a minute. That's odd. Oh, it's thinking it's a... Wow, interesting.
1 hour.
Huh.
Yeah. Shall we?
Yeah. Do you see me?
No, but that's not what I was trying to do. I'm in IRC, but I was trying to see if I couldn't invite people, but it doesn't work that way somehow. We got to get rid of that, and I promise I'll look into it within the next 10 days. Meanwhile,
Cannot join channel. You must be invited.
Yeah, but all you can invite yourself. That's what's funny. When you see that, you type, and I've said this several times. You type /MSG.
Hang on. I'll just do it.
/MSG.
MSG. Yeah.
Space. Invite.
Invite. Yeah.
Space. Hashtag VUC. Pound VUC if you prefer.
VUC. No, we do.
No such Nick channel.
Didn't you have to have a Chan serve in there?
Yeah, didn't I say Chancellor?
No. Probably, that might be white.
So sorry, I'm getting tired.
So MSG/MSG Chanserve invite. VUC. Is that right?
Yeah, with the DS.
I get you are not authorized to perform this operation.
That's because you're not an operator, you said. You should be, but I don't know, you're not. Everybody else is, including Andy. I thought you were, though, when I looked.
Should be.
James, you should be. Andy, you should be. So if you just type those, but you have to be identified on IRC first, and that's a good thing.
Okay, that doesn't seem to have done anything.
I suggest we close. I suggest we end the hangout. I made it an hour. I think everybody can compliment me on that. And
okay, so now I've been invited to channel, and now I can't send to channel.
Yes, you can. Let me just.
No, I can't.
Let me just do this one thing, and we'll be gone out of here. And we can still leave ZipGX if we want. Thank you, everybody. I've accomplished the hour and 2 minutes.
Let him.